I'm the director, Andrew Blauvelt. I'm also curator of the exhibition Too Fast to Live, Too Young to Die, Punk Graphics, 1976 to 1986. People have been asking about 86. I don't know, it's 10 years, and we had to cut it off somewhere. Then you get like the 90s thing happen, I don't know. But I don't know if he's in here, but he's visiting today. The work that's up in the galleries, which I hope you'll check out, or maybe you've had a chance to check out, is from the collection of Andrew Crevine, who is from New York, and he's, by coincidence, he's visiting us today and this weekend, and so he might still be up with his all the thousands we didn't show in the gallery. There's about 600 works in the gallery. There's about another 600 up in storage. Well, I will try to introduce him later, but it's rather remarkable that he produced this collection. There's an interesting backstory to that, and his family connections to London in the 1970s that helped propel that collection. His collection is unusual because it covers both the UK and the US. And this is my shameless plug for our catalog, kind of dumb punk style. So it's actually a newspaper in an unpunk fashion. It's $25 because it's hard to print paper today. In fact, it's printed in London, which is kind of just an interesting aside. But the thesis of the show was really looking back to the United States as the progenitor of punk. A lot of people associate punk out of England in 77, 76, and then re-imported back in the United States. But the roots of it really, I argue, are here in not only in Michigan, but also in New York City. So that's kind of what you'll find in the catalog. And then we've arranged the show as a design show, so it's not exactly in chronological order. It's done by different categories and different themes, because we really wanted the focus to be on the graphic design. And as a professional graphic designer and as a curator of graphic design, I really wanted to go back to this moment when design was being challenged from, well, basically a lot of upstarts, and a whole kind of DIY movement, what we now call DIY, and an appropriate and important challenge to professional practice. So I wanted to create this exhibition, which will be traveling. Luckily, we just found out to New York and then off to Europe, which is great. And then, so you have a great opportunity to see it here. But when we were doing the research, of course, Michigan, which is really, especially Detroit, is Music City. So they would definitely have its roots here. And of course, a lot of the proto-punk, the seeds of punk were really planted in places like Detroit and Ann Arbor in the 1960s. So it was really appropriate that we do this, because people were going, why is punk at Cranbrook? Yeah, they're like the clash of two totally different cultures. So this will probably be my last show. No. But it's been warmly embraced. I also wanted to do a show that was something in my time frame. My earlier show was about the hippie culture, and so it was just too young for that, but not too young for punk to have happened. And so in order to put this together and to do our public programmings, we ran, by coincidence, we ran into Rob St. Mary, who had just received, or was about to receive a Knight grant, who was doing the history of punk in Detroit, and we thought this is perfect if we could get Rob on board to help us navigate these histories, especially local histories, are really complex. And so Rob has kind of been our shepherd, and so you can blame him for history has all these responsibilities, Rob. So I will introduce Rob, and Rob will introduce today's special guest. And he will probably give you a more introduction about why Michigan, not just Detroit, but Michigan at large, is really important with this idea of punk graphics. So Rob Bates St. Mary has been involved in storytelling since he started an underground student newspaper while still in high school that was heavily influenced by fellow panelist Jerry Vile's Orbit magazine. So that puts you somewhere in the late 70s, early 80s, I think, if I'm doing math right. Since then, he has become an internationally renowned award-winning writer, radio and podcast host, reporter, producer, journalist, filmmaker, and crowdfunding professional. Rob is best known for a career in radio and broadcast journalism with stints at WJR in Detroit, WOOD in Grand Rapids, WDET in Detroit, and KAJX in Aspen, and of course writing with the Detroit Free Press. As a writer, Rob received Michigan Notable Book Award honors in 2016 for his first project, the Orbit Magazine Anthology. And he is, as I mentioned, a Knights Arts Challenge recipient, and he's currently in process on a project documenting Detroit's late 1970s punk scene. Please help me welcome Rob St. Mary.
Yeah, it was earlier in the year, in the winter, I got a call from, I believe it was Laura Mott in the curation department, and she said, hey, you wrote this book on Orbit that seemed to do well and cover a lot of punk graphics. You have a lot of flyers and things in there. Is that your collection? And I said, no, I stole all of that from another person who had a great collection. But I said, I do know people who can get you that. So I talked to them, and I was looking at sort of the era in which they were working, and I knew that from my standpoint there was at least 2 to 3 people that had to be on this panel in reference to creating media, creating magazines. And then all 3 of them, or all 4 actually on the panel, had worked together at some time in reference to flyers or working on each other's magazines. So I'll just kind of go through the list here to my left. Paul Zimmerman is the founder of White Noise. And you came all the way from Los Angeles, and boy, are your arms tired, so he flew in. And with Jerry Vile, created basically the scene version of what was going on in New York and LA at the time. New York had punk, LA had Slash. They were heavily influenced by both, and created a magazine around the Bookies Club 870 scene, which started in early 1978. Paul's... After time doing that magazine, he also worked on Fun with Jerry and Orbit as a writer, and then moved to LA, worked at Film Threat, Geek Monthly, Femme Fatales, probably a half dozen other magazines that are maybe around or no longer around. And he's just got a lot of good jokes. And he lets me stay at his house when I'm in Los Angeles, which is nice. Next to him is his cohort in crime, Jerry Vile, who, of course, who started with White Noise, and Jerry probably best known in the bookie scene for his band The Boners and their rather theatrical manner on stage, which we'll talk a little bit about. Went on to start Fun Magazine in the mid-'80s, which then evolved into Orbit, the magazine that had a big influence on me and probably led me down the path of destruction I am on today. But since 1998, has been doing The Dirty Show. So this year coming up is 99, is the 20th anniversary of The Dirty Show, International Erotic Art Exhibition, and there is a call for entries. So if you do any erotic art, get with Mr. Vile and show your wares at The Dirty Show. Next to Jerry is Tesco Vee. And I love his story, and I'm hoping we can get into it a little bit on how Touch and Go came to be. But he started Touch and Go as a fanzine, which then became a record label and put out punk rock singles now that, as you said in the last panel, now cost more than your car. So, but he is also the main man of the Meat Men and a vintage toy collector who tomorrow will be having a fabulous vintage toy show, which you should go to, and it's a lot of fun. And we'll talk more about that. And next to him is T.M. Caldwell, also I know him as Tim. And he really should be doing my project, but I'm doing it. But he's been a great help in terms of helping me find people, a rabid collector of arcane ideas and hidden underground things, and he knows how to find the right people. And him himself as an artist, as a graphic designer, created record labels, record covers, flyers, magazines, books, all kinds of great stuff, and we'll be talking a bit on what Tim has done as well. So thank you, Tim. So what I decided to do to kind of make this flow is I'm going to kind of start in order. So we're going to talk with Jerry and Paul first about White Noise and their work, then Tesco, and then Tim, and then sort of a free-for-all, and then we'll open to you for your questions. So kind of going from there, you two cats there, that's a lovely photo. Yeah. A little more volume from me, or just in general? So there you have it. So let's talk about white noise, guys. Jerry, Paul, how did, why white noise? Is it on? I don't know. Okay. Let's see. And we got a green light. There you go.
That's plenty. Why white noise really starts as Jerry's story as he journeyed out west. Would you like to take that part? This will include why we went to Chicago first and saw the premier punk band at the time, which was a punk venue, which was the Mayor of a Pier, and then we were in San Francisco for Mabuhay Garden, and then eventually LA for the Mask, which were the big places of the time. But this is really Jerry's story, so take it away.
You got it.
Like why we went.
Yeah.
Well, I take it there's some kind of extra credit being involved. I wasn't expecting more than 10 people. Do people think this is the Social Security, getting the most from Social Security? 'Cause it doesn't really look like
How many are actually in the wrong
students.
auditorium and are afraid to get up and leave? Our reason for being there?
Sure.
Well, this was in that Detroit Rocks book, but I assume most people haven't read that book, so.
Yeah, I did get accepted to USC, and kind of blew it. You know, when we were putting these magazines together, we were expecting more that we'd be at a panel at the Louvre, not some local.
It is funny seeing this stuff here, because the last time I saw any of my flyers on display was there's a bathroom in Hamtramck. I'm not sorry, it's in Greektown, and I was in the men's room years ago, and I looked up and said, I did that one, and I did that. Wow, I don't remember that one. So the change from here to there is a bit much.
Yes. From windshield litter to museums. Pretty much the plan all along.
So after we were inspired, we came back and we liberally stole from the magazines we liked at the time, which was Punk Magazine, Cream, especially with their snarky captions, Slash Magazine, which was out of LA, and National Lampoon, Mad Magazine, of course. It was all the stuff, you know, the punk stuff was like the stuff that had been discarded by society. So you had Three Stooges and Ebb from Green Acres and Underground Comics, and from the dregs. Okay, that one was, after the first issue didn't sell very well, we said, what would sell? So we said, those things that the supermarket always sell, let's just do one of those. And then the week after it came out, one of the popes at the time died, so there you have it.
Too soon?
Yeah, that was a too soon joke, and you didn't even realize.
Oops.
Yeah, that was the Pope before John Paul II.
See it. That was before molestations were big.
Back when the church was honest.
This gives you an idea of, you know, how did you guys put this together? What was the methodology for actually creating your pay stuff, creating the pages?
Any kids here? Nowadays, it's so easy to do stuff on desktop publishing, but back then you had to type everything out, cut it out, wax it, paste it, all that crabby zip-a-tone stuff around it to try to dress it up. So it was, again, working with the scraps in newsprint. And I think, didn't we have one printer that refused to print?
Yes, we did.
Do you remember which issue and what the issue was?
I believe it was the Northville Record publishing company did not.
You mentioned Ann Arbor and Detroit, but you forgot Northville.
What about Northville?
The punk people that came from there.
Yeah.
In Livonia, like Stevie McGuire and Don McKelping. Gary Manson, who's pictured right there. Yeah, okay.
Very nice. So, yes, what kind of animal reads white noise? And explain this fascination with Mr. Vile, if you would, the flying nun. I'm trying to reconcile these two images.
every time you show that picture, an angel. No, Surinsky gets
Surinsky
a
gets
dime or
150 bucks,
something.
yes.
Well, back then I was so light that if the wind would blow any faster than 20 miles an hour, it would lift me up if I happened to be wearing a habit.
Yes, this is
And
true.
Obviously from the crowd booing or something off the ground.
So Jerry installed a winch system that went up through the ceiling and into the back, like food area behind the stage. And over the years, the number of people that says they were pulling on that wire has increased to must have been 100 people back there.
Yeah.
And for some reason, I don't know why we were mad at you, but we were determined to put you through the ceiling.
I would have been far better off finding enemies to man the
I think Rick Metcalf was one of the
aircraft
pullers.
wire.
And you should mention who your bandmates are there.
That is the late Steve King as Hitler and Mike Rushlow, and somewhere not pictured, like all drummers, is Mike Murphy.
So the Flying Nun, this is part of that, as you were saying, like throwaway culture kind of stuff?
Yeah. Like I say, like Ebb from Green Acres, these people that didn't get respect, but they deserve to be canonized, obviously.
If I'm allowed to drop a few names.
You're going to have to pick those up when you leave.
It was a movie of this that actually brought the band's attention to Jonathan Demme.
Yeah.
And he thought the idea of a flying nun was surrealistic. He never had TV growing up, or just didn't watch TV and didn't understand was much more than surrealistic.
There's much more. It's beyond surrealist.
Beyond, it was, probably our greatest teacher of our generation was the television. This is more of improv than publishing, just like throw whatever crap we could at the page and create what we could out of it.
Yeah, it was a lot of found art, stolen pictures. And the one that was there, Surinsky took the picture of Jerry, and the part that's in the exhibit here, we gave Sue, in consideration of her great photos, a quarter-page ad, but if you look closely, we misspelled her name. So it says Surinky, which became her nickname.
I was wondering about this cover. Who is that?
That's Timmy from the Denizens, and we had a couple benefits. One was the White Noise benefit, which was a weekend, which was the only time we made any money, and all the bands were very nice to play. And we were like, how hard can it be? We'd been in the dressing room a number of times, and I went up there, and all the bands were sitting there. I'm not going first. I'm not going first. So Gary Reichel came in and went, all right, you assholes. You're going next, and then you, and then you. So our second show was the White Noise Circus, where we decorated the whole bar. And this was, Timmy was singing in the Denizens, and somebody thought it would be funny to jam pile him on stage, and a bar glass was underneath him, and it ripped his back open. And he refused to go to the hospital until he'd finished his set. What a trooper. What a sucker. What a sucker. And we lost him about 10 years ago, after he was in the Air Force. Timmy? Not related to this incident, but that's our tribute to him was to put him on the cover for doing that and not going to the hospital in a proper manner.
Isn't that one of those rare inside covers where you...
Yes, another one determined not to sell.
So this is some of your work as flyer art, and of course the boners again. So let's talk about the flyer art.
That's Paul's art degree.
That's right. Let's talk about you are college educated, my man.
If only your parents were here to see your
Good
art
thing they're not
hanging on display in a museum.
So part of this is mine. The first three on the left are stolen from an old EC comic. And the bottom one of M50, that looks like Jerry's style. And actually, the writing on the bottom looks like Jerry's, too. But the drawing on the right that is mine. Yeah, I had the good fortune of being Not the best, but the first around for flyers at bookies. So I was like their house artist for about a year until they found better people. And so I did a number of flyers. And Vince actually paid me on time. I know a lot of you have Vince stories about what a creep he was, but he paid. And this is one of Vince's bands, Cold Cock, and I did this artwork. And Dennis Lauren helped get it in registration, so it actually has some color. Cinecide. What was her name? Elka? Elka. Norton, who was in a band called the 27, that's his girlfriend. And she's holding a gun because it's Cinecide.
And this is your collaboration.
Yep. This is the only time Jerry and I painted together. And Jerry had just got an airbrush, and he was experimenting with that. So I don't know where one of us stops and the other begins.
Learned how to use it. Yes, I remember we wrote all sorts of mean things in the border and did it in the clashing cyan and magenta. So
Yeah, we searched what would be the hardest thing to read, and those two colors, when they're put next to each other, are a pain in the ass.
they fight each other.
This is a Tremor Records collection I did, a bunch of stuff for Tremor, and Gary Reichel is nice enough to not require text on the cover. So he had to put a sticker on the shrink wrap, and I drew it myself.
Well, just going back to that, you've got an image like this. So you definitely, how much of a workout were you getting from, doing flyers to this? Because obviously you're evolving as an artist, as an artiste, Mr. Zimmerman.
Oh, shucks. Yeah, hopefully I got a little better after a lot of experience.
I just wanted to go back also to the logo. You had a story on the logo, wasn't it? How you came up with this?
I just remember I was still at Michigan State, and I did the white part with a rapidograph, for those that remember the little ink pens. And then I was having a hard time with the noise, and I had this professor that finally went, "Would you just finish that already?" And he took a Conti crayon and drew out a version of it, and then I adapted it from that. So I'm giving Joe credit, Joe Kushai at Michigan State.
And then we come to fun, Mr.
Yes, that's when art becomes computerized.
So talk about this. Art becomes computerized for you.
That is probably one of the first things I created in Mac Paint or Crap Draw. I don't know what the actual program was, but
Yeah. With the magazine itself, it was how did sort of fun develop? Because you guys stopped White Noise around 80, and then you went and got day jobs. Is that kind of what happened?
printing was really, really expensive. Like if you wanted one little line of type, it would be minimum of like $5. And then I'm trying to think of the name of it. They're out of business now. What is the? No, the chart band. No, I'm thinking of
Page
Page Maker.
Page
came out. And I got it for work. So I was able to, with a little persuasion from Mr. Rick Metcalf, put it to reviving the publishing career, which was done pretty much at night after the day job.
So at this point, when you came in to do White Noise, you had actual publishing experience. Jerry didn't have any.
Well, I'd written some stuff in high school, but I actually didn't pursue it in college at all. I'd done movie reviews and stuff for the Northville Mustanger for the school paper. But I hadn't pursued it in college at all, so it was kind of like, I got to thank Jerry for dragging me back into it.
Yeah.
And Paul taught me the thing is you could write anything you want in light blue ink, and it will not appear in the final product.
Yeah, I knew all the tricks.
So what did you like when you went on to Fun, and then and then later to Orbit, what was it that you think you picked up from working on white noise that helped you do that?
Don't be mean to your advertisers.
Somehow I'm doubting you.
Didn't really take that lesson to heart.
Does Fun still have the thing about first free humor one before the Onion?
From my research, I think it is First Free Humor magazine.
It was supposed to be one of the first desktop published.
That's true.
Still use that word.
Yeah. So that was because the Onion was 88, so you guys were 86, so you were a little ahead of the curve on that. There you go. So
Yeah, I can take that to the bank.
you can take it to the museum, where we are right now. So I don't know. Do you want to add anything about Fun?
This is where we, White Noise, we sold for the hefty fee of $1, which was,
A lot.
yeah, that's 1/200th of our rent, divided by 3 or 4 people. Here we decided to do a free magazine. This is by the Hutchinsons, Daryl and Joe used to be kind of the in-house graphic guys who could, just draw.
It should be mentioned too that like when punk first came out, we started meeting all these people that we hadn't met before, and it's been said before they probably all were at the what was it, Southfield Cinema?
Oh, not the Telex, the Cabaret.
Yeah, the Cabaret. So if you had taken a picture from the front of the Cabaret looking at the audience, it would be all the people that would end up in punk. So there was all these people that we didn't know were out there, all these creative types. And then the second wave was when Fun came out, all these other people came out of the woodwork, mostly this time, obviously not musicians, this time it was great illustrators and artists and stuff.
Yeah, well, this is free, and you can drop it off in all record and comic stores. So eventually, it started drawing people who didn't think right to the magazine.
It's like when you have a light and you shine it and the cockroaches all come running out.
They usually scurry.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we will get on to Tesco. Give him the mic. So let's talk about this, your love of 999.
The genesis of my journalistic career was a band called 999. Any fans out there? Played at bookies, brought the house down every time. So I was a college kid living in my parents' house, and 999 was playing at Dooley's, which was this a frat bar in East Lansing. I was hell-bent I was going to interview him, and I was like, I don't know what got into me, but I was an English major at Michigan State, so I approached them as they were eating dinner, and I was just like freaking out because these were like my punk rock heroes, and they were like, hey, mate, come on, have a seat. And, what do you got for us? And I was like, holy shit. So I asked them I don't even remember much about it at all, but this is my first fanzine. It was printed on that crappy, glossy mimeograph paper. And I don't remember how many copies I made, 10, 20. Took them to Flat Black and Circular, and from there I caught the bug. I wanted to sing it from the heavens about the joys of punk and indie music. And
that brings us to the fingerprints.
that brings us to issue number 1. Well, I had to call my magazine something, and Howard Devoto left the Buzzcocks and had a band called Magazine, and he had a 45 called Touch and Go. When I looked at that, and I'm like, I think I'll steal that, because stealing is part and parcel with what we do. So there it is. It's very artsy fartsy. It really doesn't. It's not a harbinger for what was to come, but it's once again, issue number 1 had 50 copies. Count them, 50 copies. If you can find an original one, you'll be doing okay.
So beyond being an English major, what was, for you, why this?
Well, I just thought I was at I believe it was the Cold Cock Show, and I'm going to repeat myself from the last panel discussion, but at this place called The Stables that we'd see all sorts of great bands. Muddy Waters was there, and Cold Cock was there because Cold Cock was always there. It seemed like every show I went to, they were the warm-up band. So I looked across the room, and there was the star running back from the football team, Dave Stimson, and he looked at me, and because I had been the superintendent's son, like pot smoking in the parking lot guy. So we didn't hang out, but we caught each other's eye, and we were like, hey, man, what's going on? And we shared a mutual love of the music and decided to start a magazine. So I could actually transfer my love for writing into something that was tangible and extol the virtues of the music that was absolutely exploding all over the globe.
For you, where did the name come from, and why did you have to use a fake name, or did you?
I came up with a fake name because I wanted to lay the wood to people I didn't like, and I didn't want them to come beat me up. It's pretty simple. Like TSOL or Sissies, I wrote a song called that, and TSOL back then were big surfer guys, and Ian MacKaye got jacked up against the wall, and Brian Baker did too, but I never did, because I didn't go to the shows. I'm not that dumb. But anyway, I wanted to tell it like it is. I wanted to be like my hero, Lester Bangs, and write a review that had nothing to do with the band. I just wanted to be an asshole. And Bob Vermeulen is not very cool. So Tesco Vee had a better ring to it, so that's what I picked.
The issue 6. So we're looking at this.
Oh, that's Friction, a band. We would get, it was all like Connect the Dots, Pony Express. You'd go to the P.O. box, and this band from Japan started sending us 45, so we sucked their dicks. Sorry, is there any children in here tonight? Sorry, there is a baby, but he doesn't understand what that means. But yeah, it was like really discordant, grinding, noisy, and we loved it. So then we sent them our magazine with our positive review, and more Friction records came, and it was this sort of symbiotic thing, and that's how it went. It was just like random. You know, the P.O. box would have a Minutemen 45 in it, or a Teen Idols 45 in it, and we'd be like, awesome. It was just how it kind of organically grew.
Speaking of children in the room, what were you doing at the time?
I was a third grade school teacher in Williamston, Michigan. Which is where these magazines got printed at 3 o'clock in the morning. Yep, that's true. I would go in on Friday afternoon and say, hey, Gloria, have you put a new drum in the copier lately? She'd be like, I can take care of that for you. And then sure enough, that night I'd be in there churning them out. Some of the copies are really light because, Xerox machines back then were really crappy. And so, my biggest fear was I would leave some scandalous thing on so I would check it like obsessively, like 15 times to make sure there wasn't a picture of Farrah with cum gushing out of her nose left on the, so yeah. Did you ever get caught? I never got caught. And I think the statute of limitations on illegal copier use is long past. Oh, Penelope from the Avengers. We were obsessed with Penelope because she's super hot, and she's like one of the greatest punk female vocalists of all time. And my wife and I had a little pact, like there's 2 women that if I ever had a chance to bone was Penelope from the Avengers and Agnetha from ABBA. And we knew I was never going to get Agnetha to, because she has all sorts of stalkers, people like me. And for years I somehow just thought Penelope was gay because she's just such a dominant force. She wouldn't put up with loser men like us. And then I found out a few years ago that she's not gay, but alas, I think my time has passed. But anyway. I stole this picture from, I don't know where, some West Coast publication, and just because I thought it just was, at this point I think this was the second issue where we actually went to a printer and had the cover print. We could only afford to have the cover printed professionally, and then we would do the rest on the copier at the school. So it was getting kind of fancy right about now.
Color.
And there's Doyle from the Misfits. Anybody who's ever was around there, Detroit was the Misfits' home away from home back in the day, and we kind of went out to Lodi, hung out with those guys, and they came here, and they were pretty shitty back then, but the kids loved it, out of tune, but it was the image more than the actual the form over the function. Yeah, that's it. Anyway. Hung out with Danzig until he turned into a raging asshole in 1985, and that was the end of our friendship. But the Misfits they were part of the sort of the changing, there was that little changing of the guard that happened when the hardcore kids started to be a pain in the ass to the bookies regulars. And I was a bookies regular too. I loved it. I would drive there and see 999 or Gang of Four or Penetration or the Rosillos or the Cramps or Johnny Thunder's Heartbreakers, and then drive back to Williamston, get home at 3 a.m. and get up and go teach third grade. Rinse and repeat. I did it many, many times, and it was just like bookies was where it was happening, and eventually, in East Lansing, it started. I mean, we were spoiled. I mean, we had the Stranglers and the Ramones and Subhumans and X played all at this Dooley's bar, and then Club Doobie happened, and we had DOA, Black Flag. It was heady times. Bands actually came to Lansing, for God's sakes, and shockingly enough, and the Necros and the Fix, our little local bands would warm them up.
Well, talking about, and I don't have any covers in here, but the time when you start putting out the records, how did you do the layouts on those, or how did you do
Yeah, Dave Stimson was at LCC, so he did the Necros and the Fix first 45 silkscreen on this kind of construction paper, and we hand cut them, and it was strictly born out of necessity because nobody else was gonna, hey Tesco, you want to do our record? Nobody else will, sure. So I did 100 Necros, the Sex Drive EP, and I did 200 of the Fix, the Vengeance in This Town 45, and then the Fix Jan's Rooms, and then I did the first 4 or 5 records, and then Corey Rusk took the label over and went on to superstardom with it. Should have kept a percentage. What kind of an asshole am I?
You had this idea, and you told me to put this in.
Oh, yeah. So anyway, I had the brilliant idea that when Henry joined Black Flag and he grew his hair out, well, let's make fun of Henry Rollins. So I enlisted the aid of my buddy Pusshead, and you guys probably know he is an artist in Boise, Idaho. His real name is Brian Schroeder. He did the Gorlak, he did Metallica, he did skateboards. He's a pretty big deal now. So I said, hey, let's make fun of Henry. So he said, sure. So he drew this, and we put it was like in glossy stock on the back cover of Touch and Go 20. When Henry got wind of this, he had a thrombosis. He called me, yelled at me, then he hung up and called Pusshead and yelled at him, and that was pretty much the end of my friendship with Henry Rollins. So another broken relationship for Bob.
See, but I thought the whole point of the name was that they couldn't find you.
Yeah, well, Henry had met me, so he knew the jig was up, but.
Yeah. Did you put him on the cover on that one, or was it before that?
No, he actually was on the cover of number 22, the picture of him and Ian. Yeah. Ian's like flipping him off, so I liked that. Because they're like best friends, but.
Yeah. So is there, we talk about sort of touch and go and that for you, how do you kind of discuss it? I mean, it's in the book, you can go get it up there, but is there anything that, informs what you do, or what do you think about it?
Now,
Maybe.
30 years later,
Sure,
35 years later, I mean, it was just like a labor of love. I was just shooting from the hip, had my avocado green Selectric and my ashtray piled with cigarette butts and my bottle of gin and my different balls. Remember that? You could put different balls on the typewriter, and it was just like, yeah, fancy. And it was just like, I don't know, it was something went off in my brain that made me want to do it. And now I look back and I'm like, so Some of it I'm a little ashamed of, like some of the poofy synth rock that I was in love with back then. People tease me about my love for the specials and all the ska stuff, but hey, I was a college kid. You know, you get more pussy at a special show than you do at a boner show. So I was being pragmatic and just, uh-oh, I just lost a couple of them. Sorry about that.
So to Tim, Mr. Caldwell, there you go. So as for you, give me a little bit more on kind of how you ended up.
How I ended up doing punk rock graphics and getting into the music.
Yeah.
I was a latecomer. I thought Quaalude from the Tubes, when I was punk, early on. Then I was in London, Ontario. They kind of mirror London, England. They have their river towns, double-decker buses and whatnot, and they had these 75, 76 punk rockers. And I met a green-haired lady there that had like spiky do, and she's like, and I had my like Camaro or Nova or whatever dumb car, and she's like, oh, you take me home and I'll buy you lunch or whatever. So I did, and everywhere we went, her attitude, was super like Sid Vicious if she was a female, and people would just move out of her way. And we went to the house, and they were like, they had these fanzines they made that looked like Dada, like just take pop culture, cut it up, throw it in a blender, and like throw it at a piece of paper. There it is. They just took advertising and screwed with everything. And I thought it was kind of ingenious, because I like Dada and surrealism, because it was kind of like anti-art, like Tristan Tzar. What was that? Art is an anagram of rat. That kind of aesthetic. So anyway, we went to go get I wanted to get this free meal, right? There's no such thing as a free meal. So she took us to like the Five and Dime, and they had the counter there with the food. She just walk up to people and make faces and stuff and say, "Are you done with that?" And people would be like, "Yeah." Wilted lettuce or parsley, and she made me a salad with some half-eaten tomatoes and whatnot. And I'm like, okay, I kind of like this. I don't know. It's like, I like Eddie Haskell. I like John Waters. I like Lenny Bruce. It's like funny and obnoxious. So I kind of like started getting into this stuff, the records and whatnot, where you could find them, And I picked up like Tesco's magazine, Touch and Go. Said it's marked in. I like 81. They published some of my art. It was like do photographs. Like I'd shoot these elaborate photographs. I get my girlfriend. Like I got an idea for the effigies. We'll hang a ventriloquist dummy in my mom's garage, swing him, and then you take the garden shears. And you're gonna cut him down or cut his head off. And he's looking like with a blindfold. He's looking with one eye. Like what the hell's that coming at me? I don't know. Then you'd convert it to Xerox because nobody can afford halftones. So you do a Xerox dropout, retouch it. And it's like Warhol and those guys in Gerard Malanga where they did the line shots of photos and screwed with it, drew on it, whatever, Oh, they had like stat cameras. We had the wonders of like a really shitty Xerox to drop stuff out. Generational loss and going with a rapidograph and whatnot. Yeah. So it was a lot of fun because there was no censorship. You could do, smart alecky, snarky stuff and just mess around with like press type and whatnot because that's what we had. If the letters crack, it looks great because it's punk rock, whatever, Yeah. So this came about, there's a movie from the 50s called The Black Sleep, and it was a mutant did it. So I Xeroxed the crap out of it, took a rapidograph, as Paul said, a technical pen, and just like dotted it up like I'm Virgil Finlay or something, and then decided there was a lot of skins that would have their lower lip tattoo inside it, so you could have a hidden message, whatever skins rule or something stupid like that, And so I thought the next step would be and if I don't know if he did it to himself or somebody else did it, but there it is, and he's looking up at it, and I just thought it fit because the guy was like looked like a skin, So it was like, what do you have? The school for your artwork.
Get to the other one.
So it's whatever you have. If you got some white out, you got some tempera you stole from high school and it hasn't dried out. You got some. Sponge technique, whatever you got, throw it in there. What do you got? What's under the kitchen sink, let alone the kitchen sink, and then there it is. That was I wasn't aware of Niagara and this whole Liechtenstein thing going on. I just thought it would be funny to do something in a pop art type of aesthetic. The idea was, he's just some Frankensteinian concoction here. Obviously, the hangnail on his thumb isn't the worst thing going on. But the idea was he was flipping everybody off so much he rendered himself lame, if not impotent. I don't know what that. It's just a finger. A finger's a finger sometimes. Yeah, the heart on his sleeve. No, it's the broken heart. That's why he's obviously mad. I don't know. Kind of funny about the eye patch now that I have one eye going and the other one not. It's like Victor Bronner painting a portrait of himself with one eye gouged out, and then like the surrealist had some bout and somebody threw a glass at him and cut his eyeball out. It's like self-fulfilling destiny there. So yeah, that is where you take a bunch of junk you have, like, oh, I found a Fisher-Price clown thing that's all busted up in the alley. I got a hand crank from a window. I got a flour container from your counter. It says flour or salt, whatever. So I thought a Jack the Ripper in the box and a skull-headed clown would be a thing because, I don't know, 84. So then ICP came up and then Dancy was doing clown skull graphics. But I just had a bunch of junk. I'd shoot a photo, then I'd retouch it up, and there it is. That's Yosemite Sam action figures mustache for his hair. I don't know. I would just tear up toys and shit. Fuck with them. I love Elvis. I don't know why I was doing this one, but I get these goofy ideas, and Life magazine had some dug up bodies, and they had a casket. So I had a photo of Elvis, dropped it out. Then I took acetate overlay, and I painted it reverse because my mind doesn't work normally sometimes, and painted the rot and the maggots in reverse. So it's like a poor man's inverted Ivan Albright thing going on there with Dorian Gray. Forgotten Rebels was a Canadian punk band. They're pretty good. In fact, Eric from, the Devious Ones did a cover of a song that they covered was Gary Glitter. And I had to tell him, that's a Gary Glitter song you do. It's awesome. And he's like, no, it's a Forgotten Rebels song. I don't forget the Forgotten Rebels, but some people don't know them. Dance Macabre was Tex and Bill from RUR trying to go goth with Dave Landrum, ex-Son of Sam singer. Like Dave had wanted to be Bowie or opera singer, and he had like the, 77 British punk look, or 76 with the shock of red hair, or as Cooper would say, a rooster that was trying to raise Cain, that's what he looked like, This is me doing Dada Max Ernst. Lon Deal, he's here. Lon from Hunting Lodge. Awesome industrial noise band, not just straight up noise. They had rhythm and they were talented musicians. They did. They even had Graham from SPK put out one of their records. But I don't know. I just thought the idea of like a wayward monk on a rotting steed would be funny. He's on the path to somewhere and he's going to step on this little like civet's house. So the civet's like dry humping the horse, and he's just like, he's a monk, so God's going to give him a hand. But the hand is a giant pufferfish being thrown at your head like a Monty Python skit, and he'll knock you off the horse, and then you can walk on your way, I guess. I don't know. I don't really know what it's about. I just made this shit, Oh, yeah, that was for Hunting Lodge. Yeah, they did a booklet, and we actually printed this on offset. They had a nice varnish on there with their SM operations label coming down the back there that was like invisible, but that was just some little girl for a patterns book cutting paper dolls, and I thought, my God, it could be like a horrible god, elder god making souls, cutting up souls, like they had a record called Nomad Souls. I don't know, it's something like that. I don't know what it means. I just made shit. I don't really know. Yeah, Raggedy Man. I don't know. Did a lot of stuff. It didn't look as I did a bad scan, so you got all this bad double scan patterns there. But yeah, it was like Happy Raggedy Ann guy there, his stuffed head. I don't know. Yeah, they were on the last flyer with the Minutemen. It was like 5-6 years ago. I was at People's Records over by Peterborough and Woodward. And there was this guy in there, and he had like his whole entourage, and they were like talking to people. And I had some photos I was giving Brad. So I had one of, what's his name, Mr. Superfly soundtrack, to Curtis Mayfield. And it was when he was still with his original band, And this guy was super into, oh my God, that's amazing. And I'm like, here, you can have it. I got two, And he's like, oh, we played a show here a long time ago at a hall, and this, with this band, Hunting Lodge, they were great. And this guy showed this really creepy movie, man. It was a guy like in the 60s, like a 60s commercial for like shaving cream, and he kept like lathering up and shaving over and over. And it's a real sterile antiseptic, like white porcelain sink and the chromium. And he's looking in the mirror and he shaves and shaves until finally he just like cuts his throat. And I'm like, oh, I showed that film. It was like, it was Martin Scorsese's student film, and it was like, and it turned out it was Mike Watt, you know, and I'm like, oh yeah, and I made the flyer. I'll send you a scan of the flyer, but I got his address and I never did, because if he wanted a Xerox of it, I sent him a Xerox in the mail. That's how I work, you know. But yeah.
I mean, you're definitely a bit darker than these guys who, like your humor is a tad more dark.
I don't know. Oh, I became a horror illustrator professionally later. Because you can see where, you know, because like, but all the guys that were my heroes wrote forwards to the books. Like Robert Bloch, who wrote Psycho, you know, would write a forward to the book and whatnot. And the guy who wrote The Crow, you know, his screenplays and whatnot, stuff like for those type of guys. Or Michael McDowell wrote Beetlejuice, you know. And then the Stephen King big boom in horror and Clive Barker stuff fell through, and then I just went back to doing weird junk for my own amusement. You know?
I didn't get a chance to put album covers in. You did some for a couple different bands. Third Man just reissued.
Oh yeah, the Laughing Hyenas. I just did the art direction on that. Yeah. Some of the earliest albums I did was like Busted at Oz. It was the first Chicago punk rock compilation that Ruthless Records put out. Had like Strike Under, bands like that, or Naked Ray Gun, which apparently Dave Grohl saw visiting a relative in Chicago and got him inspired to be in punk bands before, you know, way before Nirvana. Yeah, I did the shatter effect on there, the hand drawn. They had some really crappy photos, so I took you know, pen and ink and did a shatter effect and placed it on some guy's face. So it was like he's the center of the album now, whether he wants the attention or not. The shatter goes out from them. And then my roommate was like, this guy could paint like John Singer Sargent or something, you know, just like totally old master. And he was like, Tim, computer graphics, it's the thing of the future. And I'm like, dude, it looks like Etch-a-Sketch. This shit's awful. I didn't see. He was like, we're going to have like suites on top of the Sears Tower, you know, just stick with me, Tim. And I'm like, dude, and what's this? You're doing ads in the back of like tabloids for phone sex. I mean, how's that work? That's like ventriloquism on the radio or some shit. I don't have that good of imagination, I guess, you know. And lo and behold, he became the guy that created Mac Playmate and Donna Matrix, became a millionaire. Was sued, in fact, by Larry Flint for stealing some photo and doing like a, you know, a porn interpretation of it. But anyway, but yeah, he did the first comic book and computer graphics, and I just went back to just like drawing shit and messing around with it. I don't know. But yeah, that's what we did. That was, I did the one for Jerry's on it. It was it came from The Garage Volume 2, which had the Boners doing Rootin' Tootin'. What Jerry's like the best country parody song I've ever heard. Blows Away Country Bob and all those dudes, and Goober and the Peas, and even Elvis Hitler. But anyway, it was had the distinction of being the first record to have the Gories on it, and it was on Lenny Pooch from Snakeout's label, which is called, unfortunately, Wanghead with Lips or something like that. I don't know, man. Nothing's too juvenile for Lenny, you know what I mean? But yeah, that was the Elvis image there, became the cover of it with like purple on it, because if we could afford spot color, you know, it was a big deal. The thing about these graphics was neat was the liberation from censorship, and that anybody could do a fanzine or a flyer without the printer going, I'm not going to print that. Like, that's beneath me, you know. So you could just, like Tesco did, you know, print your own fanzine if you could, you know, someplace. Like Mike Diana did that years later at a school system, and he left his Boiled Angel, really rotten underground comic. He left a page in there, and he got prosecuted for obscenity. It was a big deal. Wow. Like nothing had happened like that since the Air Pirate Funnies with Dan O'Neill and Bobby London doing underground comics back in the day, which I think we can all agree underground comics were a big inspiration for all of us. And bands like the Fugs and proto-punk stuff like the MC5 and the Stooges, you know, I get to say motherfucker on a record, I guess. You know, I mean, it's liberating. I mean, otherwise you have to buy like the Woodstock record or something, you know, and hear the Fish Cheer or something, you know, I don't know. You know, but, or, you know, or David Peel and the, you know, Up Against the Wall, blankety blank, whatever. But, yeah, so I was one of the few people to be able to go between both camps, because I had friends, like, there was a really severe line in a demarcation, don't cross that. If you're a guy into the punk rock classic sense, or you're the, you know, the hardcore punk rock kid. But I don't know, I just, like, had friends in both camps, so I would just go. But I never joined a clique, you know, like a bunch of people. I was like a lone wolf. I just wander where I go, you know. Any punk rock affiliation that would have me as a member, use me as a poster boy, I can't join any organization. I can't. I really can't. Any club that would have me, you know, it's like. So, yeah. So I got to go to the freezer and see the, you know, the bookie shows and all these club shows. It was like the do-it-yourself thing with the Xerox is if you could afford a second color, you know, spot color, you're really doing good. So I only did two flyers that had two colors, and one was the Todd's calendar, and I think they burned me anyway. Randy 7, he's in the joint for life and good riddance. But the other one was a boners one. Jerry always has great ideas. Jerry goes, Tim, we're going to do a parody of the AIP movies. Like, I was a teenage Frankenstein, but it's I was a teenage boner. And I look real 50s, you know. And I'm like, awesome. So I get to do Eddie Haskell or some shit, you know, one of my heroes, you know. And it was like the kid's in the can, and he's doing it like he's going to comb his hair like Kooky or some shit, you know, from 77 Sunset Strip for all you seniors out there. But he's looking in the mirror in a can. There's all this bad graffiti, you know, like Kill Warriors here, Felch Me, whatever, S. Clay Wilson type shit. And he's looking in the mirror and he sees himself. He's like, got a boner. And Jerry later is like, it took him like 30 years to go, Tim, why wasn't the boner erect? And I'm like, that's the horror of it, Jerry. You're a teenager and you're flaccid. You have raging hormones. I don't know. But, and I thought about it later, and it was like, yeah, he was right. I was supposed to make it a boner, but that was my excuse. But yeah, and Herbert Cohen, who made all those movies, he's from Detroit. He's like one of ours, like Roger Corman, so God bless him, you know. But yeah, that was one of the rare ones with two colors, and Jerry drew a bunch of lettering, and we did it at, you know, damn, privilege of two colors. And somebody came up to me once and told me they saw it, and he goes, that's my favorite ever flyer, Tim, I ever saw. I'm like, dude, that's really sorry and sad. It didn't come out quite right. I was trying to do EC Comics, and it just looks really bad. But anyway, so there you go.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, and I will go to the audience and see if we have some questions. People would like to go a little deeper on things. Yeah.
In my mind, looking back, I get confused between Cream magazine and Circus magazine. Any thoughts on the difference?
TV.